Indian food. That's it. There's no gimmick here. Indian cuisine is the best vegetarian cuisine, hands down, because 30% of India is vegetarian. And that is a lot of people considering India has over 1 billion people. So 30% of like 1.3 billion people eat vegetarian, and they've been eating vegetarian for generations, for so long, and they have mastered the art of making vegetables taste good, which is so important when it comes to vegetarian cooking, because you don't want to be making salads. You don't want to just be eating cheese. Like, you want to take your game up a notch. You got to get creative with it, and Indian cuisine is where it's at for making those veggies taste incredible. And the variety is insane. Most people think of like the standard curry. Maybe they've had it at some shitty Indian place. No. When you're talking about traditional Indian food, it goes deep. And you'll see in this video, although these recipes aren't 100% traditional, they take traditional Indian cooking techniques to make 3 different courses, all using veggies as the star. There's just a few basics that we gotta cover right up front when it comes to making Indian food. Number 1, you gotta get your spice game on point. These are my favorite essential Indian spices right here that I use all the time. These are whole spices, so the seed form. Obviously you can use ground spices. I tend to use more of the whole spice, but in Indian cuisine you'll see both in most dishes. You'll see it starts off with some of the whole spice, then it moves on to ground spice later on in the dish. Speaking of ground spice, number 2, we've got a little garam masala right here. You can go to the store, you can get curry powder or garam masala powder. Those are like the 2 biggest ground powders, and basically it's just a mix of what I showed you. Maybe they're toasted before and ground up, but these are great all-purpose spices. If you don't want to deal with like 100 different spices, you sprinkle a little bit of this in, you'll get some essential Indian flavor. Just make sure you get a good one, because you don't want to get stuck with some shitty curry powder. That's no good. We've got ghee, which is probably the most popular cooking fat in India. And basically ghee is just clarified butter. You can buy this in the store. If you want to save money, you can just take butter, put it on a simmer, and what's gonna happen is it's gonna start bubbling like this, skim off all that foam on the top, and then the solids are gonna form on the bottom, so you're just gonna pour the clarified butter off, keeping all those solids on the bottom. And the amazing part about ghee is those milk fat solids that we just got rid of, that's the stuff that burns at high temperatures. So now we can use this delicious butter flavor, but we can get it up to about 400 degrees in the pan, and we don't have to worry about it smoking right when it goes in the pan, getting some nasty burnt butter flavor. That's out of the picture. So get yourself some ghee. The last essential for these recipes at least is ginger garlic paste. You'll see this in so many different Indian recipes. It's basically just a paste made out of ginger and garlic. So they puree it down, and it works great because you don't have to sit there chopping up ginger and garlic. You just add that paste to your dishes, and boom, shanakin, you got yourself flavor. The first dish we're gonna start out with might be the most traditional, because I learned it from my Indian friend who learned it from his parents, who probably learned it from their parents. So it goes way back, and it's a spinach dish. And you'll see in India a lot of spinach dishes, but they treat spinach a lot differently than we do over in the States. You know, usually we wilt it down for like a minute, maybe we blanch it. That's not how it works with these dishes. They cook the shit out of spinach. They stew it down. So if you ever see a saag paneer, try that out at an Indian restaurant, see if you like it. It's like a pureed Indian delicious spinach dish. We're gonna start off with just coating the bottom of the pan with some of that ghee. Now we're gonna add in our whole spice, and this is called tempering the spices. So you're basically just infusing the oil with the whole spice. We've got coriander. We've got some cardamom that I just cracked lightly to release some of those seeds inside. We've got some cumin seeds. Once that cooked for about 30 seconds, I added some fresh chili in there, and then some onion, and then some salt. The salt will help brown those onions a bit and also add just a layer of flavor. You really want to cook that on a nice medium heat. Cook it low and slow to make sure you caramelize all of that goodness right down. And then once those onions are looking delicious, just like this, we're gonna add in our ginger garlic paste. So just give about a spoonful or two of that stuff. And the ginger garlic paste will cook very quick because it's a paste. So you gotta make sure you stir that around so it doesn't burn. Once that cooks for about a minute, we're going in with our spinach, and this is gonna look like a ton of spinach, but again, it's all gonna stew down over about an hour of time. Just pack in your spinach. This is fresh from the farmer's market, but if you've got bagged spinach, just get like 2 big bags. You'll be surprised, you need a lot for this dish. You can even get some of that frozen stuff too. A lot of recipes are actually made with that. That's all right in this case. I'm gonna add a little bit of water to steam everything up to get it all nice and wilted down. And then you're just gonna start cooking that down and really breaking all of that spinach down, melding all of those flavors. Once everything's wilted down, we're gonna add a little bit of salt. We're gonna add some garam masala, and this is a homemade one I made, but you can use a store-bought, of course. And you see this a lot in Indian dishes. You start out with the whole spice in the beginning. That gives you a nice texture and good flavor. And then you sprinkle in some of the powder to really up the spice levels. A lot of times I just skip the powder because, I don't know, Indian spice, they really go for it. I don't think it's necessary, but that's obviously traditional. Now I actually had some chana dal, which is a split chickpea, which is very popular in Indian cuisine, but you can use any type of lentil, maybe some beans. You're gonna add those in right here. And then I just added a little bit of water and let that cook for about 30 minutes to 45 minutes until the chana dal is cooked nicely through. It's tender to the bite. And you'll see over time, the spinach really breaks down, which is what I love about this dish. You're not used to eating spinach that was stewed down so much, but the end result is just fantastic. You can call it a saag, I don't know, maybe just a Indian spinach stew. So the next dish, we are shifting gears a little bit. I guess you would call this more South Indian cuisine, where you see more coconuts, because this dish has a lot of coconut milk in it, but it's pretty much just a coconut curry. Very basic stuff. You can use any vegetable for this dish, but we are going to use butternut squash. So I started off with some coconut oil. Instead of ghee, I'm using coconut oil because it's gonna match nicely with the coconut milk. Then for the dried spices for the tempering, I'm gonna add a little bit of coriander. I had some fenugreek, sprinkled some of that in, some cinnamon, and then some mustard seeds, which you see a lot in Indian cuisine. And then I had some dried chilies, and I just stirred those around into the oil, tempered those up, infused that goodness until those mustard seeds start to pop. And that is basically your indicator that your onions are ready to be added in. So I go in with some chopped onions. Just stir those up on medium heat until they get nice and brown and delicious. Again, in with the ginger garlic paste, a scoop or two of that. Cook that all together for about a minute, and then we are gonna add in some chopped butternut squash. You can use any type of squash you have. And then in with the butternut squash. Give that a stir around, and then I poured on that creamy coconut and just let that all cook together. Bring it to a boil, just let it infuse all of those delicious flavors. Once that's cooked for about, I would say 5 minutes. So what I did at this point was I took some fresh turmeric, which I had, and obviously you can use dried turmeric, which you see a lot in Indian cuisine. A lot of dried turmeric sprinkled on at this point in the dish. It gives it really nice coloring, good flavor, but I just took the fresh stuff and grated that in. I like the flavor of the fresh stuff a little better. At this point, I actually decided last second to add some sliced mushrooms. I just wanted a little extra something in there. I thought they would soak up that juice really nicely. So I added some fresh chopped mushrooms, and then I added a little bit of tamarind paste, which is just really nice and tangy. You can use lime juice, lemon juice, any acidity you want, but tamarind I thought would work really nice in this dish. And just cook that for a few more minutes until it came together and created a beautiful coconut curry. And for this dish, I felt that I kind of overcooked it a little bit. The butternut squash I was working with, it was a little smaller. I like it when it's a little more tender, but feel free to turn it into mush. You could puree that whole thing and it'd be delicious. So the last main veggie course, and maybe my favorite, at least the dish that I make the most, is this tomato eggplant dish. And I've kind of transformed it because you see this dish a lot in Middle Eastern cooking, so I've almost fused the two. But you do see a lot of eggplant curries or like eggplant stews, eggplant tomato dishes in Indian cooking. So let's get after this one. The first thing you're gonna do is roast your eggplant. And you don't need to do it this way, but I find it's really easy to just roll them up in some tin foil, throw them in the oven at about 400 degrees and cook those things for like an hour and a half. Make sure you go the extra notch. If you think they're done, I would say cook them for another 30 minutes just to make sure those things come out so soft and gooey. To start on the tempering process, I got a little bit of ghee in the pan. I added some cardamom, some cumin seeds. I had some green peppercorns here. You can use regular peppercorns. I just smashed those up. A little bit of chili, and then stirred that around. Added the onion, and then a little bit of salt, and just cooked that for about 10 minutes. You can see a lot of the dishes start off very similar, and there is a big trend in Indian cuisine when it comes to curries. They start off similar and then they just kind of shoot off into different directions. I added my ginger garlic paste, cooked that up for about a minute, and then I added in chopped tomatoes, which I love when it comes to Indian tomato sauces. It's so simple, they just add in fresh tomatoes to so many of their dishes, and it's really changed my cooking. I add fresh tomatoes like this to so many dishes now. You're gonna see those tomatoes release a lot of juice, so cook that down like you are stewing a tomato sauce. Took about 10 minutes to really get it down to a nice point. And then what I did was I chopped open those eggplants and scooped out all of that meat. You don't want the skin is bitter. You wanna discard that and just keep the good stuff on the inside. And then add all of that. You don't even have to chop it up because it's so gooey. Add that to this tomato sauce and stir that around. Add in a ton of cilantro and cook that for about another 5 minutes. And that is, I guess, an Indian tomato eggplant stew. I don't know what you would call that. Maybe someone else knows better. But that to me is my favorite type of dish. You've got the best of all worlds. Just Indian tomato sauce is so good. It's like, I've stopped making regular tomato sauce because you could just add all of these delicious flavorings and then you could add whatever vegetable you want to that. It's one of the easiest ways to make vegetables taste good, which is the goal of vegetarian cooking. Now we've got all of these delicious stew, curry type things, so of course we need something to eat that with. And in Indian cuisine, a lot of times they just eat with their hands because they've got some delicious bread, whatever. They've got so many different types of bread to eat it with. We're gonna go with some standard flatbreads. So last night I actually made some dough. I let that rise overnight. And it was really simple. I just rolled them out into little flat discs and I put it into a cast iron pan on one side, just dry on one side, and I let that cook for about 3 minutes on medium heat. And then I took some of that ghee again and I just brushed the top. And once that really started to bubble up nicely, then I flipped it over and cooked it for another 2 or 3 minutes on the other side. And you've got delicious flatbread. It can't really get better than that. You scoop up some of that good stuff right there, and you've got yourself an Indian feast. And that's really what it's all about. They bring out a bunch of these little curry plates and they have a feast. And to me, it's like when I figured out good Indian cuisine, because believe me, there's a lot of shit. Most people, they honestly, from America at least, they think of the shitty Indian cuisine. Unless you know someone that was cooking you good Indian food when you were a kid, or you went to some really good restaurants, there's a lot of shit stuff out there. It's kind of like Chinese food. It just got Americanized at some point. But when you look at the traditional stuff, if you go to India, even over in the UK, incredible Indian food, just start looking into the techniques, start learning some of the basic spices. I've covered just some of them in this video, but there's just an endless wealth of knowledge and cooking skills when it comes to Indian food, and it's definitely one of my favorites. So stop eating just salads. I mean, salads are good, but you gotta take your game to the next level. You gotta start learning how to really make vegetables sing. You've gotta get creative with it, and Indian cuisine is one of the best ways to do that. That's it. Make sure you subscribe to my Instagram feed, Life by Mike G. You'll see me cooking a lot of these types of dishes because honestly, I cook like this all the time in my regular life. So if you want to see some stories on that and stay up to date, make sure you subscribe to that, subscribe to Brothers Green, and keep on cooking.